Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
You know, I know it may come as a surprise, but many people are still sexually active into their 80s. So if you wonder why things are quiet between your sheets, it isn't necessarily about your age. Yes, your body changes, but that doesn't mean physical intimacy has to end. So what is true and what is myth about your sexuality and ability to experience physical pleasure as you age? Well, my friend and intimacy coach, Janae Paylette, is back to talk about this subject specifically as it relates to menopause. So, Janae, thanks so much for coming back on and talking about what I think kind of gets people, people are confused. Let me just put it that way. People are confused. So
that is definitely true.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of these things that's like, on some level, the mechanics of sex are fairly straightforward, but after that, I just think we all just get confused. So you've written a series of blog posts about menopause myths, and I wanted to talk about them so that my listeners can understand what's really happening at this stage of life and how it really doesn't have to mean an end to sexual intimacy. Easy for me to say. So let's start at the beginning. What is the relationship between menopause and a woman's sex drive?
That's a great question. So there is this huge myth in our society that sex stops at menopause, that women completely lose their desire for sex, and that's the end of it.
Right.
So you hit your 50s or your late 40s or 50s or mid 50s, and you're just kind of, you're done with sex. It's uncomfortable. It doesn't feel good anymore. I'm just, not in the mood anymore. Like, I don't have the same hormone levels anymore, so I just want to stop having sex.
Okay.
And that is really not true at all.
Okay, so if it's not true at all, why is it such a common belief? What is actually going on here?
Well, I mean, I think there's some realities, right? Let's not dismiss realities, right? Our hormones do change during menopause, absolutely, right?
Yep.
Our estrogen decreases and our progesterone decreases. And some of that hormones do affect various parts of our sexuality, right? We sometimes, our vagina gets a lot more dry or irritated. Night sweats can drive women crazy, right? And we know they're not just during the night, right? And there are things that actually make you just I don't want to have sex. But
basically it's like, I'm so hot, I don't want you anywhere near me. It's like, just go away.
Exactly, right. And there's two things about that. First of all, that's not true for every woman.
Correct.
Right? It's a myth that every woman has a huge negative impact from menopause. For some women, menopause is like, oh my God, thank the Lord. I'm not having menstrual cramps anymore. I'm no longer afraid of getting pregnant, right? Like, I'm not PMSing. Like, my body actually feels better, number one. And number two, there's also a time limitation, right? Like, we go through this, this very kind of more intense menopausal period, but then it ends, right? You don't have night sweats, 24/7 for 10 years. We have it for a period of time. So I think that's one of the myths that we really need to be thinking about. And also we shouldn't make the assumption that just because hormones are shifting, you won't feel as much sexual desire post-menopause. Right? For like I said, for a lot of women, myself included, I was way more sexually interested and way more excited post-menopause than I ever was before.
Right.
So there are other important factors that really impact women's desire for sex, and I think menopause just becomes the good excuse.
Right. And there is, at least in the United States, now I know in some other Western countries, this doesn't happen, but older women disappear, right? It's like they're no longer seen as desirable and whatever. And so just as a societal thing, we're not thinking, oh, this really attractive woman in her 60s or 70s, or not even, forget really attractive, but just this woman in her 60s or 70s might still want to be intimate with her partner, or, this idea that somehow, I don't have the statistics, but I know sometimes, in retirement homes and nursing homes, it's like you have this problem because the residents are wanting to have sex with each other and they're in their 80s.
Right.
Like, it doesn't stop.
It doesn't, right? And that's really important, to be aware. And to be honest, the truth is, and I think some men would tell you this, for women, sex actually can get better as we age. It gets better. It's more pleasant.
Right.
We're more informed. We're more in control. We have much more of a sense of what we want and what we don't want. And frankly, we don't give up, as much as we did in our, we're sort of like, yeah, I'm 60 and, I'm going to do what I want to do.
Right. Right. I mean, there is some kind of that freedom when you get older that you really stop caring what other people think.
Exactly. Right.
Which actually is very freeing. So, but I did want to talk about something that I think is really important, because I've been on a couple of podcasts really speaking to men about this, and I've had the men, the male hosts go, oh my gosh, I never knew that. And so this is about explaining the difference between spontaneous and responsive desire. First off, what are those two things, and how does it impact your sex life?
Mm-hmm. So spontaneous desire is basically, oh my God, I'm so horny. Right?
I just want to rip your clothes off. Right. Yeah.
I just want to rip your clothes off. Right. And it sort of happens out of something, it happens out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And spontaneous desire is really very much related for women to our estrogen levels or to our dopamine levels, right? And in our earlier childbearing ages, our estrogen levels are much, much higher than they are as we age. And the other piece of this is our dopamine levels can also be tied to spontaneous desire. And this is irrelevant of age, right? So dopamine is like, the crack hormone.
Right.
Dopamine is incredibly addictive. And dopamine is released during sex, especially during orgasms, right?
Okay.
So the more dopamine that's released in your body, the more your body craves more dopamine, which is why I say an orgasm begets more orgasms. The more you have orgasms, the more your body, from a physiological perspective, actually desires to have more sex and more orgasm because your dopamine levels are high.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
I'm going to have a question about dopamine in a little bit, but I want to get on to the responsive desire.
Okay, so that's the spontaneous desire.
Mm-hmm.
Responsive desire happens when your body responds to arousal, to being touched, to being teased, to being turned on. It is not, and I really want to say this again, it is not at all dependent on your hormonal levels. And it's the most common way that women experience desire in their bodies, regardless of what age they are, whether you're 25 or whether you're 65. That is actually the most common way that women experience desire, right? Mm-hmm. But the key thing about responsive desire is that desire follows arousal, which means you have to have an opportunity for your body to be aroused before you actually desire sex, because the arousal causes the release of the dopamine, which increases the feeling of desire.
Okay. And I can see how, especially if you've got a lot of stuff going on in your life, maybe you have school-age kids and you've got a job, and we have the popular buzzword of busy. How are you? I'm really busy, right? So it sounds as if responsive desire, if somebody experienced that, and I'm right there with you on that one, that sometimes just waiting for those early days of, I just saw you, I just saw your butt or your chest or whatever, and now I'm really hot for you and I want to rip your clothes off. That's probably not going to be happening during this time. Is that what I understand, kind of, maybe?
Maybe, but not necessarily.
Okay.
Right? I mean, stress, for example, is one of the greatest blocks for any type of desire for both women and men. And what you're describing, super busy lives, kids, etc., older kids, having to take care of parents, right? Being in that, sandwich generation is going to cause a lot of stress, and that's going to decrease desire as well. We could go into a whole other thing about why, even if in a responsive desire in an older age, you would want to, tear your partner's clothes off. Right? If in fact, you've created like gourmet sex, right? You've created the type of relationship where everybody's emotional needs for sex are being met. But typically that doesn't happen. People need to actually be educated around that. So one of the things I feel that women really struggle with is they feel like they're broken because they no longer have spontaneous desire. Right? As opposed to accepting and understanding that there's these two types of desire, and let's not weigh once or judge one against the other. They're both valid. They're both awesome, and they both bring you into a state of your body wanting to feel more arousal and have more orgasms. The issue with responsive desire for a lot of women is that you don't feel like you want to have sex, right? And so you either have to like fake it till you make it, and I'm not talking about faking orgasms, right?
Right. It's more like being open to that experience. Yeah, it's being open.
Exactly. You have to be in your head and and say like, okay, I know that when my partner starts touching me after 5 or 10 minutes and I get touched the way I want to touch, it's going to start feeling good, and I'm going to start feeling turned on and want to continue and have sex. But that's, again, that's a mindset shift. It's a paradigm shift of like, this is okay. And it can have its negative repercussions when one partner keeps on being like, I'm the one who always has to initiate sex because you're never horny.
Right. Well, I mean, and I do think, and that can be a frustration, and that, and it's, I've had this conversation about spontaneous and responsive desire with, another podcast, and men go, oh my gosh, because it's like, this explains why your wife is not initiating sex. It's not because she doesn't want to have sex with you. It's just she has this responsive desire. So it's kind of like, let me, let's get in the mood here. Let's kind of set things up so that I am in a position where I can respond to you. And so I just need to remind you, because we're going to talk about that in just a minute, but I do need to remind my listeners that this is Happily Ever After is just the beginning on webtalkradio.net. I'm Leslie Dories, and I'm talking with intimacy coach Janae Paulette about aging, menopause, and sex. And the truth is, you can have great sex for most of your life from a physiological perspective, but sex can be really complicated. And if your intimate life isn't all you want it to be, unfortunately, you're not alone. But the truth is, it doesn't have to stay that way. And it takes courage to address this very personal part of your relationship. And if you're ready to try, I can help. I invite you to take a moment and send me an email or give me a call to schedule your 5-star relationship call with me. You can reach me by phone at area code 924-0463. That's 919-924-0463, or by email at Leslie, Lesli, at foundationscoachingnc.com. That's FOUNDATIONS, coaching, N as in Nancy, C as in Charlie.com. And I want to get back to this conversation about arousal, desire, sex, all of this stuff. Because, Janae, you said this a little bit ago, and that menopause is often used as the fall guy for lack of desire when it's really about, mediocre or painful sex. So can you talk about that?
I so can. So, I do, I run couples retreats here in Asheville, and I see many, 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 many couples, and they come to me because their sex life sucks, generally speaking.
Right.
And why does their sex life suck? Because, they do the same thing over and over again. There's absolutely no creativity.
Okay.
And they, 9 times out of 10, especially for women, right, they're not really ready for sex.
Okay.
There is not nearly enough arousal for them. There's not nearly enough foreplay for them. It just doesn't feel good. And so then you have PIV, penis and vagina sex, and it hurts, or it's painful, or it's uncomfortable, or it's only, it's okay. Maybe I have an orgasm, maybe I don't have an orgasm, but it's okay. And if sex is only okay, right, then why do it? Why not go watch your favorite Netflix, binge a Netflix show or whatever, right? Like really, that is how women, that's 100% how women think. That's exactly what they're thinking about.
Right.
So that's a huge problem, right? And I think, 90% of couples have very, very mediocre sex lives. Mm-hmm. And, one of the things that's really different, and I do want to sort of just flip back to this about spontaneous desire for a moment, is the difference between how women get aroused and how men get aroused, right?
Okay.
And this is a big piece of it, right? So if you touch a man's penis, most men are hard and they're ready to have sex. They're really pretty fully aroused. You don't have to do a whole lot more, right? To get them to the point of orgasm. And that is because, men wear their genitals on the outside of their body. Right. So they have from a very young age been used to having erections and seeing something and getting aroused and feeling arousal and touching themselves and masturbating, which is much more common for men than it is for women, right? We, as a species, those of us vulva-bearing, right, we wear our arousal on the inside of our body. Our entire arousal network, with the exception of 25% of our clitoris, is internal, right? And so growing up, we're not our clitoris isn't enlarging when we see a cute boy in school, right? We have a very, very different experience. Okay. And so I think very often what happens is a male partner thinks if I just start touching her clitoris or if I start touching her nipples, she's going to be ready to go because that's what happens to me when my genitals are touched. And that is so not the case, right? Okay. And so, therefore, women are not sufficiently aroused. Sex is only okay. And by the time menopause hits, they're like, damn, I'd rather be watching Netflix. This doesn't feel good for me, right? And so menopause becomes the big excuse. And you have no idea how many times I hear this. Right. But menopause becomes the big excuse for women to stop having sex, period.
Well, and I know it's very, very difficult to either, to even identify what feels good, because like you're saying, and again, there's some cultural stuff around this too, where, women aren't necessarily encouraged to explore their bodies. Maybe they are, maybe younger women are now, but but this idea of what feels good. So if I don't know what feels good, I can't share it with my partner. My partner's kind of left to their own, well, this feels good for me, so let me do it to her. And I mean, I think there's just a lot of lack of knowledge about how to arouse a woman.
100%.
You know, I mean, and it's interesting because I always talk about, you know, for most people, vacation sex is great because you're relaxed. There's no time pressure. It's not like, okay, it's 10 o'clock at night. Let's do the deed and go to sleep, right? You know, and that really, I mean, there's something called an orgasm gap, and I don't know, I mean, but it's the gap between when people have sex that men almost always have an orgasm, but that's not true. It's quite a bit lower percentage for women.
It's pretty big. It's like 75% of men have orgasms, and I think it's about 25 to 30% of women have orgasms every time they have sex.
Right. And so, of course, guys are going to want to have sex a lot because they're really enjoying it. And women are like, what's all the fuss about? Right?
Right. Exactly.
And, you know, and so, and so this is a pattern that couples fall into. And I've said this before, you know, that nobody has to go to sex school. And I think it probably would be helpful if we all did, because it's like, you know, we don't know how our bodies work. And like especially when you're talking about men where it's all on the outside, they can see it. Women, it's all on the inside. We can't see it. We're left to feel it. And so what is that process? What should be happening?
So I think it's multifactored, right? It's not just physiological. It's not just physical, right? Women's arousal for many women, and true for men as well, but less so because it's so much easier for them to get aroused through touch, right? Most women also need a psychological level of arousal. It's not just physical. It's physical and it's psychological, right?
Okay.
So let's start with the physical piece, and then we'll move to the psychological. So the physical piece is really around warming a woman's body up, right? So, you know, a woman's body is like a cake baked in the oven. It bakes from the outside in. This is the biggest mistake that couples make. They go immediately to the genitals. Right. Immediately. Like maybe there's a little kissing, maybe, usually not. Then there's like grabbing the nipples, you know, going down on my partner, and then we have intercourse. And that happens in a period of like maybe 10 minutes if you're lucky, right? That's the average amount of foreplay is about 7 minutes, right? Okay. Which is, to me, totally insane. And so women need to be touched from the outside in, which means there's a lot of erogenous zones. Like I like to say that a woman's entire body is orgasmic, and it is. And there's a lot of erogenous zones on our arms, you know, the inside of our elbows, on our necks, right, in the clavicle area, our ears, our lips, right? They're all over. And so, and most women, not all, but most women really start getting turned on with very light, gentle touches. Light, slow, gentle touches. I tell my clients, like, you're barely touching the hair on the arm, right? You want to create this situation of where you're getting goosebumps, where your partner is getting goosebumps on her body, right? That's a signal of the beginning of arousal. Okay. And spending a lot of time on touch and then beginning to sort of increase the intensity of the touch with a little more holding or a little firmer touch or a little more pulling your partner to you or squeezing them. And really kind of avoiding the genitals until, like, she's kind of squirming under your fingers. I mean, that's really what I like to see, right? Like when she starts really squirming and feeling good because you're biting her neck and you're blowing in her ear, and you're teasing her, right, then maybe you can think about touching her breast. That's basically my rule of thumb.
Okay.
So that's the physical piece of it, right? But there's also, and this is super important, there's the psychological piece of it as well, right? So a lot of women, and this will vary because we have different types of sexual styles. Some of us are more sensual. Some of us are more energetic. Some of us are more kinky, right? Some of us are more sexual. But many, many women also need the psychological arousal. And for a lot of women, that involves words, which is really hard, right? For a lot of their partners to be able to use words to turn them on. But there is a psychological component of that, of the teasing of a woman, of telling her what she wants to hear. Does she want to hear that she's beautiful? Does she want to hear how turned on you are? Does she want to hear what I want to do to you when I get your panties off? Whatever it is, right? There is an element of the psychological piece and teasing, because really what you want to do to create a lot of desire is to create this sense of like a battery, right? Like a charge, an electrical charge. There's a positive and there's a negative, and it creates a charge. And that charge is created through the building up of erotic energy, and erotic energy is built up through not giving your partner what they want, right? For holding back, for taking your time, for teasing, The more you don't get what you want, the more your body craves it, right? The more that you're told you're on a diet and you're not allowed to eat, chocolate pudding, the more you are savoring that chocolate pudding. Well, it's the same thing with arousal. Right? The more you want your vulva to be touched or your clitoris to be touched or your breasts to be sucked, but they're not. They're just teased really lightly, the more your body wants that. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute complete sense to me. So here's the big question, because, I know that you work with people, but what can couples do on their own? Because sex is so personal, and it's so hard to talk about, and it's so hard because it's like, how does somebody ask their partner to talk to me in a certain way or touch me in a certain way? Because here's the other thing, and this is one of the things that can be really frustrating for men, that what worked last time doesn't necessarily work this time. So I think that may be why people get into this, this routine or rut about, first I touch here, then I kiss there, then we go for it, because because it could be so confusing. How do we get people to talk about this in a non-judgmental, solution-oriented, but just be able to have a conversation about this stuff?
Yeah, that is a very hard thing for a lot of couples to do on their own, right? But, I like to tell couples to think about sex as art and not as science. And, one of the exercises that I almost always give my couples during a retreat, one of their home play assignments, is to, go home, and each partner gets 30 minutes of just receiving. And we take all the expectations off the table, and they give feedback, right? And you kind of just make it like play, like you're playing doctor, and you're just exploring, right? There's a lot of exploration that doesn't happen. I can't tell you how many people, I'll show them, 20 different things, and they're like, oh my God, we've never tried that. We've never thought about that. I never did that. I've never experienced that. That felt really good. Who knew, right? And a lot of it is just through trial and error, let me just start at the top of your head and, start to use my nose to just to experience your body, right? and tell me what feels good and what doesn't feel good, and what if I start using my tongue, and would you like me to bite you, right? And it's just being like not having any expectation about what is going to happen, and just being in the, curiosity is the greatest word, most important word for a good sexual relationship. Can I get curious about what feels good for me? Can I get curious about what might feel good for my partner? Yeah?
Right.
And just really being in a place of, acceptance and curiosity and playfulness, and not having to feel like you have to have an orgasm or you have to have PIV sex.
Because there's so much, because what you're talking about, that time of connection is really important. And it's not just slam bam, thank you ma'am kind of thing, because that leaves women feeling like, what's all the excitement about, and they'll have an orgasm every so often and it's fine. But, it's sort of like, and again, I'm hearing my listeners, I'm sure you can hear them too, about, but that takes so much time. But, and I guess part of it is what do you want? I guess that's, if you really want to have this connection, and, and I love the idea about being curious and attempting to be non-judgmental, because that's actually a mindset as well, that curious mindset about, what is my partner going to do, and how can I experience it, and how can I, and so if there is judgment running around in your head, I think that's a clue. And I think that's, I never understood this, that mothers don't have sex. It's like, okay, well, how do you think you got to be a mother? But all right, or I'm in menopause, I don't have sex. And it's really, it's really more about those stories that we've been led to believe that what I'm hearing from you aren't necessarily true.
Yes, and I also want to say there's another very, very important component of this. And again, it's not just physical, it's not just psychological, there's an emotional component that you just touched on, right? And so if you're feeling emotionally disconnected from your partner, you're not going to want to have sex, right? And I interestingly listened to a podcast recently about like the battle between is it the emotional connection that comes first, or is it the physical connection that creates the emotional connection? Well, most men think that it's the physical connection. They go to sex for the emotional connection, but that doesn't ever work. It doesn't, because what really needs to happen is there has to be the emotional connection first. And that's a big piece, right? So, which is why, in my couples work, right, I spend 50% of our weekends, working on helping to solidify the emotional relationship, the emotional connection. Right. Because when I feel seen by my partner, heard by my partner, I feel like they can express their care and consideration and love by my partner, then, I'm much more open to physical connection. So let's not forget that is, a huge piece of the puzzle for women as well.
Right. Because it's not either or, it's both and, right? It's both physical and emotional, and it's and that's what makes it complicated. But it is But it is valuable, because it just opens up the relationship in ways that most people want, and it isn't just about one person being physically satisfied and the other one, because I don't want you. Sex becomes a chore, and that's not a good thing. We do not want sex to be a chore. Please don't.
No, and that's a huge desire killer for women, right? Yeah. When you end up having obligation sex, that's another reason that women lose their desire. And men know, or their partners know, right? Because it could be a female partner as well. Same thing happens in a female-to-female relationship, that their partner actually doesn't want to have sex. They're not into it. And damn, they know that. 100% they know that.
Right.
And it doesn't feel, and therefore it's not as satisfying for either partner.
Right. And the thing is that it doesn't have to be this way. And I know, and I want to give you the opportunity to share some information about where people can learn some more about this and actually take some action. So would you share that?
Oh, yeah. So I have a great online class. It's called Reclaim Your Desire, A Women's Guide to Sexual Confidence. It is a complete home self-study program. So there's about 9 videos and a number of like exercises and worksheets, and we go through all of the blocks that really hold us back from desire, and then ways in which you can actually get your desire back. And it's a very powerful class, and you can do it completely on your own. And once a month, I hold a monthly Q&A for anybody who's in the class, and they can come. And generally, it's awesome. It's just like a girlfriend sex talk, and we all just share what's going on in our sex lives. And I do some coaching, etc. And you can find all that information out on my webpage, which is powerofpleasure.com, powerofpleasure.com. And the program is called Reclaim Your Desire.
Okay.
And it's not super expensive either. It's like, it's like, I think it's maybe $300 or $350. It's not an expensive program.
And let me tell you guys, it really works. So go check it out. Because, one benefit we talked about before of menopause is that you can have sex without worrying about getting pregnant or, having your period or PMS or any of those fun things that come along with being a woman. And this could be free in so many ways. And yes, there are physiological changes that can occur in menopause that actually can be positively addressed. So if you're having some physiological symptoms, there are things you can do. But so if menopause...
And can I also... Yeah, Les, can I also say that I do want to say something about my retreats, because I have an awesome retreat program for couples. They're anywhere from 3 to 5 days of intensive working with me, and I'm starting local group retreats here in Asheville as well as some travel ones. Cool. And that website, different one, is passionateintimacyretreats.com if you're interested in information about that. That's a great way to, with your partner, really relearn how to recreate a gourmet sex life.
Yes, and I love that I love that expression or that idea of a gourmet sex life. So the question is, if menopause is not the true reason for a diminishing sex life, what is? And you've heard some things today that hopefully have piqued your interest. And the question is what's the impact that those things are having on your marriage? And because guys, gray divorce is the number one. People getting divorced are the people who've been married for a while. And I'm going to tell you, I think not great sex has something to do with that. So please check out Janae's websites, both of them. There'll be links on the intro for this. And until next week, stay loving.